Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's all welcome back the Masters of Ceremonies, Dr. Sarah Lynn Daway and Dr. Laarni Iscreza.
Okay, welcome to the second day of the EPDP conference.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, we learned a lot from our keynote speaker, Professor Wolak, and from the panel session, speakers of the panel sessions, and the comments from yesterday's session.
Yeah, indeed. All of us had the opportunity to participate in the different parallel sessions in the afternoon and even had an energizing socialization and interaction during the welcome reception, right? It was good food and conversation and even better entertainment. So for those who just came in for today, I'm Sarah Daway and this is Laarni Iscreza with me, and we will be your MCs for today.
We will start today's conference with our esteemed international speakers from USA and Japan. And to serve as moderator for the plenary session this morning is Mr. Romeo Bernardo. Romeo Bernardo is a member of the steering committee of the EPDP, representing the private sector. He is currently chairman of the ALFM Family of Mutual Funds, Vice Chair of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, and serves as a director in the following companies and institutions: the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, Institute for Development and Econometric Analysis, Aboitiz Power, Bank of the Philippine Islands, Globe Telecom, FINMA, RFM, among others. So let's all welcome Mr. Bernardo.
Thank you, Laarni and Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Our session this morning will focus on climate change and energy policies. Just to remind everyone, we will have an open forum after the speakers have finished their presentations. Our first speaker is from the International Food Policy and Research Institute, IFPRI for short, Dr. Mark Rosegrant. He is Director of Environment and Production Technology Division at IFPRI. He developed IFPRI's international model for policy analysis of agricultural commodities and trade impact, which has become a standard for projecting global and regional food demand, water supply trade, prices, and global water supply and demand up to 2020. The Impact Water, which integrates a detailed water supply and demand model with the food model. He also leads a modeling team that continues to further develop state-of-the-art integrated global water and food models. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give Dr. Mark Rosegrant a round of applause.
Okay, thanks very much, Romy. It's great to be back here. And what I'm going to do today is take a more international approach to the issues and look at the trade-offs and policies that affect the intersection of energy, water, and food under climate change. So the basic outline of my talk is as follows. I'm going to first just run through a few of the big trends and challenges facing food security, water scarcity, and energy use. Then I'm going to show a number of scenarios, describe the modeling that we're doing, and then run some scenarios out to 2050 to look at the impact, particularly of energy taxes and other energy policies on food security and water scarcity. Then I'll just have a few brief conclusions. So let's first start with the trends. So if we look at the sort of international dialogue on sustainable development, it's basically personified by the Sustainable Development Goals, which have just been adopted by the UN and the member countries of the UN. And they have a lot of important goals like access to food, nutrition, safe water, and modern energy for all, a strong environmental protection, including reductions in greenhouse gases. One of the problems with the goals as they're now set up is that they're probably mutually exclusive in terms of being able to actually fully implement them and achieve the targets. So there has to be a lot more analysis done to look at what are the trade-offs, and are there, for example, policies that could help us achieve several of these goals simultaneously? And particularly, are there win-win solutions to at least some subsets of these goals? So what I'm going to do is look at one particular policy on energy taxes, which we define in a way as to mimic carbon taxes, and see how those influence food security and water scarcity. So let's start with just a few trends to set the stage for this. And this first set of graphs shows population in Africa, South Asia, and East Asia. And what you can see here is that there's still going to be very rapid population growth in much of the world. South Asia is beginning to taper off. That's the yellow line, but still has a lot of growth between now and 2050. East Asia, the green line, is slowing down dramatically. But then look at the blue line. It's a huge growth still in population there. And that's important. Both the South Asia and Africa growth is important because those are areas which have relatively low consumption of food, energy, and water now, but which with this population growth and with the per capita income growth that's beginning to grow much faster, for example, in Africa, you're going to have really large additional increases in demand for these resources between now and 2050. The urbanization process that is summarized very briefly on the second panel will reinforce that with, as you can see, a big increase in the amount of people migrating to urban areas over the next few decades. And this also, for example, on the food side, will lead to shift in demand to higher valued crops, fruits, vegetables, meats, and so forth, lots higher fats and oil consumption. And also on the energy side, you're going to get much more energy intensification as you urbanize together with the income and population growth. On water, you're going to get significant increases in demand for urban, industrial, and domestic demand, in many cases taking water away from agriculture. How are we doing on food security? These show recent historical results, starting with undernourished people. And as you can see, that number is going down, but it's going down much too slowly, from about a billion to about 800 million over a 25 or 30-year period, when goals have been to cut that in half, and so we haven't even gotten close to that. In the bottom line on Africa, you even see basically no progress. On stunted children, or malnourished children, it's called variously, you do see on the top line a better performance globally, but if you look then at the next line, all of the gains have really been in East Asia in terms of reduction of malnourished children, mainly in China, but also in Southeast Asia as well. Africa, again, you see actual increases in the number of malnourished children. Together with relatively poor performance on undernourishment, you can see there's an explosion of overweight and obese children, and you see that also on adults. So we're going to have to deal with the obesity along with those people who do not get enough food. What are some of the trends that are going to drive the future? Climate change, we've done a lot of analysis. This is one of our results, but you can also see comparable results for other major modeling groups on climate change in agriculture. Maize is perhaps the most dramatic. We project a 30% lower yields per hectare for maize in 2050 under climate change compared to a no climate change case. For other crops such as rice, wheat, potatoes, and others, the losses aren't quite as big, but they also run 10 to 20% by 2050. So that puts a major pressure on the need to develop stronger investment programs and to adapt to climate change and to mitigate climate change as well. As a result of these trends in food demand and productivity that I just highlighted, our projections are that you're going to get increases in food prices from now on out to 2050. As you can see, the bottom line shows increases even without climate change because of the issues like water scarcity that I highlighted and very rapid growing demand. And under climate change, you get even, as you can see, significantly higher increases in food prices out to 20. So we are going to see a period of strong prices, which of course puts people at danger of continuing to have significant hunger. The results also show in our projections that the trends aren't going to get that much better in terms of food security. We do see, without climate change, the shift from the green bar to the red bar. We will manage to get from 2010 to 2050 down to about 400 million. That's progress, but again, it's not very great progress. And you see in the blue line, you get some increases in hunger relative to the baseline under climate change, as you would expect. Water stress risk, depending on how you measure it, these are areas in river basins where water demand is at least 40% of total supply, at which point you start getting significant local shortages and susceptibility to drought. You can see the numbers yourself, the huge increase in the population, the amount of grain production, and the amount of global GDP, which is within these areas of higher water risk. On fossil fuels, I think you've seen progress. We saw yesterday how the Philippines does relatively well in terms of the percentage of fossil fuels. And many developed countries are substituting fairly significantly into renewables. You can see that the world as a whole, when you factor in all the countries of the world, is still extremely reliant on the old basics of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. You see, renewables are a tiny percentage of the world as a whole. Hydro is a little bit bigger, but also very small. So given these various trends coming up, how would energy taxes impact food security? Could we have energy taxes in place that would start to reduce that rate of climate change while still not, providing reasonable outcomes in terms of food security and water scarcity? And I won't go into this in detail, but just to say this is the modeling framework. What we've done is link the impact model. It was briefly mentioned in my introduction. Impact is a agricultural sector model, and it produces, as you can see on the right-hand side, annual outputs on a number of important variables. But it's also linked closely with water supply and demand and climate models, as well as technology-oriented crop models, so that we can take into account the effects of climate change here, water scarcity, as well as technology, population, and income growth. And what we've done that's innovative for this paper is link it to a so-called computer general equilibrium model, which models the whole economy, so we can embed the agriculture results together with results in other sectors. And just briefly, the analytical model is the GLOBE computable general equilibrium model with modifications to link with impact. This is a pretty typical model. I guess I probably don't have to go through these different aspects, but it's worth noting that it has 22 sectors, 22 regions, and 5 primary factors of production. It's a pretty standard, these assumptions here and these specifications are pretty standard, kind of state-of-the-art on global equilibrium models. But the beauty of these models is it does allow you to look at what happens in climate change or agriculture also affects the rest of the economy and vice versa. The problem with it is it doesn't have enough detail, and that's what we get the advantage of both the general modeling plus the detail by linking it with the impact model. As you can see here, this model covers 56 commodities in the agriculture sector, so great detail. Really 159 countries or regions, and has detailed structure, as I mentioned, on technology, land, water, and climate change as well, and solves for world prices in all markets, demand, supply, and also the nutrition indicators. So by linking it, we're able to look at, for example, we calibrate the results so that agriculture productivity, GDP prices, and are all linked and consistent. then we put the different kinds of climate or energy tax shocks into one model and have that model talking to the other model to get the overall effects. In terms of scenarios, we do first a baseline scenario with given energy prices and with and without climate change. Then we do a second pair of models where we implement energy taxes to generate higher fossil fuel prices, and again with and without climate change. Then we do a third set that has the energy taxes, as you can see, plus we increase the production of the demand and production of biofuels is another possibility to help mitigate climate change. These show, let's show some of the results now. Look first at what's called terms of trade effects. Terms of trade are simply a summary of the amount of imports a given country can buy for any unit of export. So if you get increases in terms of trade, you're gaining. If you get decreases, that's a negative impact that will also negatively impact income and GDP. And you can see that the energy price shifts due to energy taxes do provide some significant changes in terms of trade. So the reasons that mainly gain are those that are net importers of the primary fossil fuels, because the energy tax drives down the prices of those. Losses but for exporters such as the Middle East and North Africa, you get significant losses of these. Regions that are importers of primary fuels and net exporters of refined petrol, which of course has higher price in this scenario, get bigger terms of trade gains. So India and high income Asia such as Korea and Japan gain by this. But those regions that are both net exporters of primary fossil fuels and importers of refined petrol, and that characterizes much of Africa, East and West Africa in particular, you see significant losses for them due to the energy prices. But the change in fossil fuel use in agriculture, in the electricity sector is significant under the energy taxes. So as you can see, energy taxes that we're putting, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the earlier slide. So the taxes is 70% on coal, 50% on oil, and 30% on natural gases, which was key to the greenhouse gas emissions content of those fossil fuels. So you get significant declines in fossil fuel use in the electricity sector due to those. So that's a good thing in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and slowing climate change. What happens is with the higher prices, there is a greater shift in incentives and then greater use of renewables in the economies. The impacts on real household income are summarized here. This is sort of percent change from that baseline scenario in 2050. As you see, there are negative impacts on GDP overall, but quite small aside from those countries, those regions where I mentioned made out worse in the changes in terms of trade. So for East and West Africa, you get losses of 5 or 6% of GDP. But remember, that's a total loss in 2050. It's not sort of an annual increase in loss. So it's not huge, but it is something to could be concerned about. What happens to food prices? You know, of course, those energy taxes change demand for food and also change the cost of production in the agriculture sector as well. But what we see here is that those effects, more or less, the effects kind of cancel each other out. So that somewhat lower household income that we saw reduces demand for food slightly, and then the increase in prices of fertilizers, pesticides, transportation costs in the sector tends to push up prices slightly. In balance, they come out when you have only the energy tax, which is the orange bar, very little changes at all. You do get more significant changes, and this will be important later, in the brown lines when you add in biofuel production. So biofuel production does tend to substitute away enough food production to boost prices in the crop sector, while reducing prices very slightly in the livestock sector. How about the impacts then of energy taxes on global agricultural production? That's shown here in this graph. Here we start, the black line is the 2020 results. The darker green line is what happens under that baseline without climate change. So of course you see significant increases over time of production due to technological change and so forth. The third line is again, with that baseline except including climate change. And here you see that climate change, as I noted earlier, does have a significant impact, negative impact on production of food out to 2050. Then the other thing to note is looking at the energy tax scenario, which is the red-orange scenario. It has very little additional impact. It does tend to result in lower production of fruits and vegetables, which are somewhat more energy intensive than grains. Slightly less also for meat products. But again, because of those counterbalancing effects, it doesn't have a big negative impact on agriculture production. When you add in the biofuel production, again, there's only very modest additional changes on the production side. But you do see, and I think this is a key slide, the results in the number of people at risk of hunger under the various scenarios. So this one shows that the number of people at risk of hunger, or the number of hungry people in 2050 under the alternative scenarios. So obviously the lowest value, of course, is under the baseline scenario where again, you don't have the negative impacts in climate change. But climate change, due to those impacts on food prices, as we saw earlier in the talk, and lower production, you get a very significant increase in the number of hungry people. So climate change has extremely negative impact on food security. The next line shows energy prices, shows the risk of hunger with energy prices, high energy prices. And you do see that there is now something of a negative impact on the risk of hunger due to higher energy prices, and even a larger impact under when biofuels are added in. But then the other thing to point out, and this is the effect that we don't capture yet in this analysis, is the endogenous effect of higher energy taxes on greenhouse gas emissions. And what would happen under that situation is you'll move back the results under high energy and climate change back towards the baseline, because you're reducing those impacts reducing those climate change impacts. And back with the envelope analysis we've done shows that moves back the impact and share of hunger to simply below the climate change scenario. But we still have to work those through to get into the final paper. Water stress, again, you get very little changes. The impacts on water stress are not hugely significant. It varies somewhat from region to region. You get, interestingly, somewhat lower water stress in sub-Saharan Africa, as you can see on the right-hand side there under the energy taxes. But that's mainly because the income is depressed, so it's not necessarily a good reduction in water stress. It's a matter that they no longer demand as much water, but you're not getting improvements on the supply side at all. So what are the conclusions then? Higher fossil fuel prices due to a fossil fuel tax do reduce household income, particularly of countries that are net exporters of fossil fuels or net importers of refined petrol. Energy taxes do cause slightly lower food demand and supply as a result of higher agriculture chemical prices and reduced groundwater pumping, but lead to relatively little change in food prices and a little bit more change in food security. Biofuel production more significantly increases the number of food insecure people. So again, as we've seen in the past few years, increases in sort of mandates and subsidies for biofuels don't seem to be a very good idea. Higher energy prices do reduce the population at risk of water stress, but again, that's due to depressing demand and water withdrawals. And the final result is that we'll be working through over the next month or so is that the extent that that reduction of fossil fuel use due to energy taxes lessens climate change, and that effect is very well established. The energy taxes will actually move from a slight negative impact on food security to actually reducing food insecurity and improving food security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rosegrant, most informative. I look forward to questions and interactions on that paper. Our next speaker is a distinguished professor of technology and policy and director of Urban Institute at the Kyushu University, Japan. Professor Shunsuku Managi. He is a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, a coordinating lead author for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, a director for Inclusive Wealth Report 2016, an editor for Environmental, Economic, and Policy Studies, and on the editorial board for 6 journals, including Resource and Energy Economics, and is the author of Technology, Natural Resources, Economic Growth, Improving the Environment for a Greener Future, and editor of the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Economics in Asia. Let us all welcome Professor Shunsuku Managi, please.
Morning, everyone. I'm Shunsuke Managi from Japan. So I try to present the study related to the climate change and the energy, especially in the relation to the disasters. So I'm giving up the example from the 2011 Fukushima nuclear power disasters, which is earthquake caused the nuclear meltdown. So this might be the good example how more disaster-relevant countries like Philippines might think about the infrastructure in case of the energies. So I start with the introduction comparing the Japan's situation with Philippines, where some of them are similar, some of them are different. So in Japan, relatively the energy price, electricity price is higher. I think it was 15 cents in Philippines, which based on the yesterday's presentation. So in Japan's case, it's not high as Denmark or Germany, but it's still higher than USA. So this motivated the Japanese government to deregulate the energy industries, and it has decided in the government for the past 2 years. So we're going to have a full deregulated industry in 5 years. So I'm going to show what's in the past and what's going to be in the futures. So if I take a look about the energy contribution domestically in Japan compared to the Philippines, so this is a case. Before 2011, and also similar to the future scenario after 2020, still Japanese government tried to rely on nuclear power, which you might think this is crazy idea for the future, but still this is a stage that we are facing it. We have plenty of renewable energy, which mostly come from hydro, but in total share is still very small. So this is unlike Philippines that you have plenty of renewable energies. And the Japanese government decided to promote the nuclear power after the oil shock in the 1973, where the oil price jumped up, and then government was discussing whether we go for nuclear or renewables. And they had a huge discussion in the 1970s and decided, head by the prime minister in that time, and go for the nuclear. So this is a long-run scenario and the expectation from the government. And for some reason, that's carbon intensity of 2 countries, of Japan and the Philippines, is almost same. So if I take a look at the overall global trend for the different technology adaptations, this is the case. So we see that, I have to know that this y-axis is a power axis, so it's not linear. But we see that in all of the technology, they are adapted slowly. So they are not jump up of the energy adaptation, technology adaptation quickly. So we see that in the end, the technology adaptation is decided by the human being. So socially, we are changing a bit over time. So it's not radically changing quickly. Even we think like we change a lot in certain times, but in the long run, it's going to go back and move slowly. This is what's happening, even in the case of Japan after the nuclear accident. So once we see the business as usual scenario in Japan, so we see that if it's a commercial use, it's still increasing for the energy use, which means that carbon dioxide increase. So this is the most difficult part in Japan, that we are not able to decrease easily. But in the industry side, in contrast to this increase, we are already decreasing the industry energy use. And household is relatively similar and constant over time. But since the Japanese population will be decreasing in the long run, we're going to decrease the household energy demand. So we have different policy related to the household and the industries. And it's relatively easier for the industry side to reduce because we already introduced a carbon tax. And you can see from the IPCC report on the domestic policy issues, if we have energy tax increase, we can reduce the carbon dioxide up to the 5 to 10%. And from our analysis, in addition to this, we can see that if the country or region are facing the more capital-intensive areas, the negative impact of the economy is huge. But if the country or region is more facing up to the human capital-intensive region, the negative impact of the carbon tax or energy tax is not much. So if the Philippines is facing the situation of the more human capital-oriented or renewable energy-oriented, the negative impact of the economy is very small. So once we see suppose we are going for the either 1.5 degrees target of the carbon dioxide globally or 2 degrees target globally, we are facing the totally different situation of the carbon emission in the world. So you see from the orange color in the electricity sector, we might have even almost zero carbon usage, but this requires a huge change in the policies. This includes the carbon tax or emission trading systems. So either of the choice of tax or emission trading systems, if they are stringent enough, that have a huge impact, which is shown by the IPCC report. But politically, it's always difficult to make it stringent policies. That's why the impact to the economy and the impact to the reduction of the carbon dioxide will be very small. So this is similar to the case of Japan's. So government in Japan are targeting for the reduction of the carbon dioxide of 60% in 10 years. So we shut down all nuclear power plants in 2011 to 2012. Then only one power plant from the out of 55 restarted now. So the government announced that they try to increase as much as before. So even though the current situation is like on the left-hand side, it's almost zero for the nuclear power. On the right hand, you can see in the 2030, they try to bring up to the 20% to 22%. Practically, I think this is very difficult because as you see from the NIMBY program in Philippines for the nuclear power plant, nobody wants that. So only the case they accept with some sort of indirect subsidy, they can accept that. So my guess would be like only 5 to 10% of the nuclear powers in reality. So all else will be covered by the hopefully more renewables, but practically more from the import of coal and gas from the outside. You can also see that our renewables is mostly dominated by the hydro in the 2030, but other renewable would be expected a lot, mainly due to the feed-in tariff policy as in Philippines. So feed-in tariff has been discussed, which was replacing the renewable portfolio standard in Japan. So in the past, renewable portfolio standards has been stringent up to 2004 from the 1999. Then the solar power has been increased a lot. But then government kind of give up and they stop the policies. After that, countries like Taiwan, Germany, later on US and China start strong nuclear renewable policies. Then after that, Japan realized that it's going to be important. So they started the feed-in tariff policy with a very high price, especially for the solar and relatively less for the wind power. Then it encouraged many small companies and the industry to get a lot of reservation, which show in the green color, especially for the solars. So you see the reservation and the installed are different. So reservation is the one that the company requests to each local government that they take the right to install and start. And earlier you install, you can guarantee the higher price for the next 10 years. So it's better to do it early. So a lot of company reserved, although they haven't started yet. So it becomes a huge problem now in Japan, telling that if all of the reserved home solar and also the power plant solar has been start solar energy, it's going to be the too much solar power in the daytime, which might have a problem in the transmission of the energies. So especially in the summertime in August. So the government tried to limit the use of the solar powers. So this is a good sign that more solar is getting popular and also other wind power. But the negative side is we're not sure how much reserved power plant operator will be actually starting the operations. So, but legally, we are not telling that if you don't start in 2 years or 3 years, you don't have a right. So this is kind of mistake in the legal process, but now it's harder to change it. So this is the current situation in Japan. So in terms of the deregulation in Japan's utility companies, it started the deregulation from the 1995. And for the major, bigger plant, it started from 1995. Then this is a third process. So we are expecting this coming April to deregulate all the household so that any company can enter this electricity and gas market. And already more than 10,000 of the small company, which is often the joint company of the utility, including electricity, gas, and the trading company, financial company, or smart mobile phones company, are joined to different, starting the different policy to the consumers. So it's going to be the huge market, and our study also showed that deregulation is good for the industries for pricing down, and actually they become more competitive over the long run, even the short run. This is clear from our study by farm level, industry level. And then later on, what's become more important is how is the elasticity of the energy price. So we are able to get all of the enterprise company level data by all the plants where the employment is more than 10 people for the past 20 years. So previously we are not able to obtain this data, but we got the permission from the Ministry of Industry, METI, for use of this data. So this, we are kind of renewing the all elasticity data to the government so they can get a better forecast telling how much carbon tax or energy tax would be have a negative impact to the use of energy in the long run, it's going to be, we can see better expectation for the economic impact too. So what's also enlightening is now it's getting more popular to start the fuel for on-site power generations. So it's not instead of purchased electricity, each power plant have their own on-site generations. So they become popular because the future expectation for the energy price or purchase electricity price becomes unknown. So they studied more, but we find that they are not still substituting the purchased electricity yet. But we see the huge trend that is coming in, and it's become much cheaper now for the many different industries. So now what we see from the detailed analysis in the engineering viewpoint and the economic analysis is we see how much would be the range for the technology for the cost. So this is just for the generation cost, including some of the waste treatment. You see that most cheapest one would be nuclear power, although the maximum expectation is the highest because we have no idea about how to treat the waste in the end. So in reality, we cannot give up the coal and also gas, thermal power. So these are still expected to be lower, and the maximum scenario will be also lower. So we see that the solar power is relatively higher, but we can see that because of the adaptation in many different industries and many countries, we see a lot of reduction of the cost. So now the expectation for the future will be how much efficiency can be gained by the technological development. So although they get a relatively smaller share in the industry, but this is still promising. So in this slide, I just want to tell that we have studied about 1,000 companies in the world for how much cost they are paying actually they are paying to reduce the carbon dioxide if they wish. So this is a kind of the indirect way of estimating the carbon reduction cost for the global companies. And what we want to say from this figure is just telling that there's so much heterogeneity over the companies and the industries. So we cannot say that relatively the iron and steel industry have higher costs or not. We find that in Japan's case, it's relatively lower cost, even considering the supply chain. So it's so much different by industry and also within industries, and of course by countries. So we have tried to estimate how much price impact to the industry and the company can be found. So we see that if there's more price increase in the energy, in the short run, of course, this is a cost to the industry, but in the long run, they encourage more technological innovation because more the energy costs, they better to save the energy. So they encourage more innovations. This is happening in the utility company and many manufacturing companies. Also, once they are facing the environmental regulations, they actually reduce the productivity of the company. But if we make the measurement that productivity considering the environmental emissions reductions, it encourages more productivity gain. So once we think about more holistic view on the society, the environmental regulation was found to be effective in Japan, China, India, and also using the old database from OECD. So also we get a kind of mandatory for the consumer side smart meter system in next 5 to 10 years, 5 years in Tokyo area, 10 years in whole in Japan. So demand side management becoming much popular now. So from here, I want to focus on what's happening from the disaster experience. So we see that from the climate change impact, the disaster is one of the reasons that people got attentions. So you might remember that, of course, that you have a heavy disaster experience in Philippines, but in case of Japan, our case was earthquake and the tsunami. So in the coastal side, most of the situation is like this. In the Tohoku region, which is north of Japan, and giving impact to Tokyo area too. So I was in the Tohoku University, which is close to these regions, only 10 kilometers away from here. So we arrived. That's why I'm here. So the coastal side was disasters, actually. So you just swipe out everything, and household, sometimes they put OK, meaning that there is a police or self-defense force to take out the waste. If they don't put OK, it means they still try to search something, so they don't want waste to be treated. So it's very terrible. We see very strange picture like this. So this is, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. In the 4th floor, we see many automobiles. It's stick in the many different places. This shows that the tsunami brought the automobile to the this 4th floor. So, basically the hydrogen or water expert cannot tell how much is the water height. So they have to go to see how high it is. So they see from this evidence that tsunami was very high or not. Usually the object stick like this because there was on the higher tsunami, then the water is coming down. The object like the automobile, sometimes ship, stick into the one that it's stable. So we see like the image like this. And I suggested with my group that we should keep this to see how the damage was significant. And let's make this to be the restaurant. We can have a restaurant in the top, but we have a huge critics from the people, which is, of course, they said if they see this, they are remembering the daughter died. So they want this to be eliminated. And I said, of course, this is true, and you should be saying that. But what I'm saying is, if we take out this, nothing remains here, even though the Japanese government put all their money for reconstruct everything. But people are leaving. There's no economy coming back. So what they do in the end for the grandchildren? So they should be kept for the restaurant or something else. But the government decision was relatively quick to say, they cannot say anything. So in the end, they removed. But after 3 years, government said that each local government can keep one in one region. And the central government can pay for the monies. But in that time, some citizens, which is in some area, like 40% of the people here, say they should have kept this, but it was too late. So this is very hard when the disaster comes. It's very hard to think in the long term. So next picture is this. For me, this was an interesting event. So when the radiations goes out, people worry about how much radiation comes out to their own ground. So the scientists and actually the biologists found that cesium, which is the radiation one type, was 20% increase in the fish, okay, 20% increase, meaning that it's relatively higher, but you see that cesium is already in every fish. And he's telling there's no impact to the human health. And the journalist said, okay, they understand that. But the next day's newspaper is like this. So, he was shocked, and many people were so disappointed that scientific evidence says there's no health impact, but the newspaper was like this. So we should realize that what we find will be shown in the truth way. We have to sometimes produce and announce the result in the realistic way and the truth way. So, by the way, this is a picture in the New York Times. And in that day, many picture was shown in this. So don't eat the Fukushima fish. And I was suggesting the Fukushima region to shut down the all fishery activity because no one want to buy and eat a fish from Fukushima. Still, they are experimenting. They cannot start the fishery operation. But for me, I used to work for the fishery issues. they don't have a futures because they are so inefficient. So they should stop and they should get a subsidy for the retirement. But this is also the difficult task. So giving the meltdown of the nuclear power plant, what's happening was they shut down all the power plants and they import a lot for the coal and the gas from the outside of the countries. So we pay a lot to the outside, meaning that the expenditure for the energy increased a lot. So this is the change from the 36 billion US dollar to the 70 billion dollar, which is a bit less than 1% of the GDP. So discussion in that time from the 2012 to 13 was, this is a huge money. And people who try to support the nuclear power said, we are losing this money. We shouldn't be doing that. So let's start the operation again. Some of the other folks, or many folks, people who are against the nuclear power says, this is only less than 1% of the GDP every year. So then we can get rid of the nuclear risk. So we should be facing that, and let's make renewable to be increased more, even though we'll be importing a lot for coal and gas. So the current government decision is we are giving the full effort for feed-in tariff for the solar and many other renewables. It's going to be continued, but this is only a few percent now, and we are expecting, regardless of the nuclear situations, but in reality, they think that they are expecting more from the nuclears. So that is the current situations. And now the TEPCO, which is the Tokyo Electric Power Company, which caused this nuclear meltdown, they are not bankrupt, but owned by government, so they still survive. And we see that this earthquake impacted to the GDP for 8.3% in 2011, which is huge. And we consider about the supply chain impact. That's why it becomes very big. So over the long run, we see the disaster impact to the economy has been decreasing globally, also in Japan. So this is an example when we have a 1923, Kanto is a region including Tokyo. They have a huge earthquake. And in this case, they have a 30% GDP loss in a year. You have a 1995 earthquake. In this times, 2% damage. But this time, we have 8.3% damage. So this is terrain which is consistent with the disaster research. Over the long run, we are able to adapt and mitigate the disaster negative impact. So negative impact has been decreasing over time. But since more people are densely populated, so like the urbanization impact, so once a big impact comes, the negative impact is also huge. So this is a case of our study showing how much monthly GDP get impacted in the Fukushimas. So you see that from the huge declining in the few months, then increase. The increasing trend comes from the huge investment supported by government. So good thing from these experiences is government has put a lot of effort to recover. That's why their monthly GDP increase. But the negative side is they put a lot of subsidies without thinking about the efficiencies. So they are mostly useless infrastructure such as coastal zone restaurant construction, even though people are not coming back, and many roads and many buildings. So it wouldn't be utilized well, but we see that what's running is, it's good to start early, but we should be thinking again and again. And finally, the nuclear issues. So nuclear was a big topic and getting popular in the past, before 2011, but after the nuclear accident, the world has changed. Then the good thing is energy usage has been decreasing. You see from this is 2011, the red one shows the energy use, and the blue one shows the carbon dioxide use. So maybe only the good thing about nuclear power is carbon dioxide. So shutting down means more carbon dioxide emissions, and less energy use. And the Japanese government put many policy to reduce the energy usage because we are lack of energy in this time. So what makes most important is it's so-called round shutdown. So government decide in each day, in this time, in this period of the 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., the region in this group have no energy. Then after 5 p.m., this group, no energies. So this is a system that actually they force the industry and consumer to not use any energy. And then even though electricity price increase in this time, it has no impact because people are just confused. So, and there are many different policy coming together. So the policy impact was not clear, but what was most clear from our experience in the research is this rolling blackout system was the most effective one, although most of the people criticize this is useless. Then many people in the consumer side, they save a lot of energy in the 2 years. The main reason was to save their money. So initially, after the accident, they consider about, they think about the electricity shortage and many other kind of nice reasoning. But if they pass 6 months, the main reason becomes the money. So this is a kind of clear message that still the electricity pricing is important, and we should be clear how much impact they have. And the red one is after the accident, and the blue one is before the accident. The x-axis is each hour in each day. So we see that hot days and cold days, we have to use more energy. But in any occasion, we are able to reduce the electricity usage. So policy impact, even though they may be mistaken, but if they provide relatively well-designed policy, it has an impact to the reduction of the energy usage. So this is a good news. And the bad news is we should be careful about how we are seeing, how we are using the money from the government, because most of the policy has been ineffective, and they are not coming back to check whether this is good policy or not. And they are not changing the policy later on. So we are kind of good in the sense that we are consistent in the use of policy, but we are bad in the sense that we are not reassessing which policy was good or not. So I'm going to finish now because time is up. Thank you very much.
I'm told we have 15 minutes for the open forum. So may I invite our two speakers, Dr. Rose Grant and Professor Managi. Please join us here. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And you can address either of the two speakers together or individually. Dr. Fabelia.
Good morning. Thank you for the talks. I was very engaged. I'd like to ask either of the speakers to, I'd like you to gauge the level of nuclear aversion today. 5 years removed from Fukushima. Great Britain is buying one nuclear plant from China now. Japan is reviving some of its nuclear plants. China is, of course, still building gazillions of them. What is the, for example, what is the attitude of the United Nations climate change to this nuclear versus fossil fuel debate?
Perhaps you can answer the question, then I'll call on Dr. Pernia. Please.
Yeah, I'm going to tell the Japan's case and the other country case. So Japan's case, we have a kind of internal vote from the citizen whether they support nuclear or others. And citizen choose 0% of nuclear power because they don't want nuclear power anymore, considering the huge risk. Then we did a survey after that, whether suppose if there's no nuclear power, we're going to be facing the higher electricity price. Then in this case, what we found is if the electricity price increase more than 8%, they are fine for choosing the nuclear power. But if it's less than 8%, they're better not having it. So this is the case in Japan. And the other countries' case, like China, they even got the impact from the Fukushima accident. They get much less support for the nuclear power, even in the south part of China. So even in some countries, they have expecting more nuclear power. This Fukushima's impact is huge, and I think this is same now. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's in most of when you look at long-term climate mitigation scenarios from, say, IPCC, and so most scenarios do include some increase in nuclear power, but not large amounts. In the U.S., nuclear, I think expansion of nuclear is basically dead now for at least for the near future. The combination of concern over both 3 Mile Island in the U.S. much longer ago and the more recent cases, plus the huge regulatory problems now in terms of the government's not willing to insure the risk of, and so private companies aren't willing to go ahead with investments. You know, that could change, but right now it's quite negative in the U.S.
Thank you. Dr. Pernia?
I'm Ernesto Pernia from the UP School of Economics. I really enjoyed listening to the two papers, very rich in terms of potential policy lessons, recommendations, and well, the analysis and the data are really, very rich. That's why I'm interested, we should all be interested in what are the policy recommendations from these two papers. What you did was you gave analysis, a lot of data and analysis, but you really didn't, you stopped short of suggesting what might be the lessons for policy. Thank you.
Would you like to do that now?
Yeah, well, in this specific study, I think the main lesson is that if you can get international agreement, that putting in carbon taxes or energy taxes can be a win-win solution. That by reducing the rate of climate change, the impacts on food security end up being lower than if you have some small negative direct impacts of energy taxes on the ag sector, but then you have larger positive effects due to retarding climate change, because any given individual country isn't going to win by if the Philippines impose energy taxes, they won't get the benefits if the rest of the world isn't, for example. We've done other work on this type of scenarios that also shows that in the agricultural sector, that large increases in investment in agricultural research on productivity growth is going to be one of the very key policies to put in place. There simply hasn't been enough investment in technological change and agricultural productivity to properly adapt to or mitigate climate change. So those would be couple of the key policy recommendations out of our work.
So in my case, I would suggest deregulation in the utility company works well if they have a consensus in the societies. So in Japan's case, basically Japan take too much time for discussion, but in the past, deregulation works well in terms of the industry's competitiveness, also to the impact to the consumer by lowering the electricity price. So in terms of the carbon issues, we have a $1 carbon tax, which is too low compared to the $200 in the Sweden, but still have an impact to the reduction of the emissions. And the good sign is it encourages the company to think that they better invest more to the R&D. So in the long run, it has shown that it's a better impact. And other sign, other policy implication is once these utility companies like the sulfur dioxide emission, other emissions, so they have many environmental regulation. It has a negative impact to the productivities, but once again, if we think about the society's perspective for the better environment, it's better off in the total factor productivity considering the environment. So environmental regulation is also essential in this case. Thank you.
If I will call on Mr. Oplas, but before I do, if I may just have a follow-up on Dr. Pernia's question. Dr. Rosgrant, you gave very exhaustive discussion on the impact on, of carbon taxes. In the Philippines, the policy of choice in changing the mix is more through the use of FIT, and we've had an excellent discussion by Dr. James on that. Is this something that you've looked at in terms of the impact of use of FIT, especially in particular fuel uses? For example, we've read literature that says solar uses a lot of land and therefore can displace a lot, has an impact on food production and that sort of things. Is this something that you've studied, and would you have recommendations on relative merit of use of a carbon tax versus an expensive subsidy, expensive not just from a fiscal taxpayer standpoint, but with a lot of deadweight losses based on what Dr. James presented? Is that something that you've looked at?
We haven't done that yet, but we could do this kind, using this modeling framework, we could also do that kind of work. We would need to get a somewhat better differentiated CGE model to have additional sectors for the renewables. But prima facie, that's not going to work well. You're going to have costs of keeping the inefficient are the technologies of fossil fuels that have very high negative externalities in place while subsidizing inefficient and economically losing renewables. So it's better to establish the carbon tax rather than try to subsidize specific sectors.
Thank you, Dr. Rosgrant. Would you have a view on the question, Professor Managi?
So in the industry related to the water and agriculture, I only study about Japan's case. The fuel subsidy has been provided a lot in terms of the fisheries and agriculture, and most turned out to be very inefficient. So those kind of subsidy and all other support will be usually not good for the society, and it's better to remove. But on the other hand, the carbon tax tend to be very sector-wise. So it could be utilized in the several different industries like the food, agriculture, or manufacturing. But it's better to be very simple, otherwise most of the new company is not coming in because it's become complex. Thank you.
May I now call on Mr. Oplas. Last two questions, and then Mr. Bernard.
Yeah, good morning. Nonoy Oplas from Minimal Government Thinkers. I think the big precedent of this conference is the Paris COP meeting in last December. But I think that that COP meeting is one of characterized by big double talk, no? Because people hate fossil fuels and everyone is going to France on fossil fuels. No one went to France riding a flying broom or a bicycle from Africa to, they were using fossil fuels. And many people, like presentation by Dr. Managi, people hate fossil nuclear, but France, the most nuclear dependent country in the world, 80% of which electricity is coming from nuclear. So a lot. So I think that with all this, alarmism related to climate. So energy policies, food policies, transportation policies are heavily distorted in such a way that there are more problems that are created than they're supposed to solve. So I think that maybe it's time for the world and maybe policymakers to get out of that kind of alarmism mentality, because climate change is cyclical, warming, cooling, warming, cooling. If you show the pictures of heavy damage in Japan, but there were reports that in 1900, thousands of people died because of global cooling in Japan and Pakistan, Philippines, Europe.
May we have your question, Nonoy? I'm sorry. I'll take the question of Mr. Bernard. Cholo, please.
I'm Cholo Bernard from Boybe's Power. I have a question for Professor Managi. One of your slides showed the comparative costs of different technologies, and what I noticed there was your wind costs were significantly lower than even your small hydro, right? Is that because the wind resource in Japan is particularly good, or or because here our wind is our second most expensive, at least where the FIT rates are concerned, almost as high as solar. So I wonder whether relatively our resource is poor compared to Japan, and I guess it begs a second question: if our resource is poor, why are we developing it?
Thank you. Wind power is considered to be not expensive because it's still more expensive than solar, but it is less expensive compared to some other country because the technology tend to be established relatively, so it's not so expensive. But sometimes it's getting very expensive in the offshore. But the reason it's become expensive is it's a relatively easy one, and the industry is already established. And I think the future will be even better because they can produce the heat, not in addition to the electricity. So this combination of the heat and the other will be more beneficial. So this, I think, we have a potential for the wind. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have time for another question?
Good morning. My question is for Mr. Managi.
Last question.
Do the very low population growth rate and the aging population of Japan have any significance at all in power demand projections in the near or medium future?
So your question is about the population decrease. So we have some region, like my town in Fukuoka or Tokyo. There are some top towns that's increasing populations. But still, even those bigger regions, we're expecting to decrease the population after 2025. And many other regions, it's already started to decrease. So the question becomes how we shut down the power plant. So this power plant is, of course, excluding the nuclear power, but conventional power plant. So the utility company think about which one to shut down first. So this becomes the issue in the regional politics that once those power plants will be removed, they have to give up the employment in the regions. So in this case, they have to think about other social aspects. So what's happening in the one region now is instead of removing the power plant, they're expecting the new hospital to come into the same area so that the people can work still. But it doesn't mean the electric engineering can work for the hospital. So the societal problem remains. And it encourages more people to coming into the urban area so that efficiency will be still good in the urban area. I'm not sure I'm responding to your question, but...
Yeah, thank you. I'm tempted to ask a final question on the relationship between carbon tax and impact on population increase. When people watch less television and have less lights, that increases population. But in the interest of time, I'd just like to thank our two speakers. If you'll please help me express our appreciation to them. Most interesting and most educational. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Romy. And may we request Romy and our speakers, Professor Rose Grand and Managi, Professor, for the group photo. Meanwhile, we can all proceed